Craig Stanford is the author of multiple books, including The New Chimpanzee. He's also a professor of biological sciences and anthropology at University of Southern California, and we're so happy he could join us from Los Angeles. Craig, welcome to the program. There's not that many people who can say they actually worked with Jane Goodall and knew her. What was it like working with her, and what was she like?
Well, of course, it's a sad day for all of us and really for everyone. And she was an amazing figure. She was, first and foremost, she was a pioneering scientist. And, you know, in the early 1960s, she went out as a young woman to an African forest at a time when spending just a few weeks in an African forest watching apes would have been considered groundbreaking science. She stayed not just weeks or months, but years and years and years. And in fact, the project that she began in Tanzania is still very much running today. And it's been 65 years, 2/3 of a century. So she was a pioneering scientist. And then later in her life, her second half of her life, her second act kind of, was that she became a social activist. She became a tremendous advocate for animal rights, for environmental awareness, and really became, I feel she became just a global icon and someone who we could all look up to for being a moral figure and a moral spokesperson. And, you know, you asked what was she like? Well, she was actually quite a quiet person, I always felt. And having lived with her at times in Tanzania, she, of course, she had a very large presence in every room she entered, but she had a very quiet grace and a very quiet strength of personality. And obviously anyone who goes to the middle of a remote forest in their early 20s and just doesn't leave and sticks it out and accomplishes what she accomplished, which was changing the way we all look at ourselves by understanding so much more about our closest relative, chimpanzees. That is a very, very powerful, strong person.
Yeah, I mean, she really gave chimpanzees names, showed their personalities, showed how they can be your friend, how they raise their children. She made them relatable. What was primatology research like before Jane Goodall, Craig?
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned that about giving them names, because when Jane gave names to her chimpanzees in the 60s in order to publish books and articles about them, and she would mention them by name, Flo and Figgin and the others, the scientific community was upset by that. They said, you know, we don't give names to our lab rats. You know, we have code numbers. We don't give them names. And Jane turned around on them and said, well, there's a reason for that difference. These are animals with personas. These are animals whose individual lives matter. And they, you know, there's kind of a great chimp theory of history that one powerful, socially, politically strong animal can change the course of the life of the entire chimp community. And she won that argument. So today we would never consider it anthropomorphizing to give these animals names. We recognize that their individual personas matter. And before the 60s, when she went out, you know, as I said, doing a field study of a wild primate usually lasted for days or weeks. It wasn't something that you thought of as being generation after generation.
And she didn't have a conventional academic background, did she? She did not have a bachelor's, but she ended up getting a PhD and, of course, went on to become one of the most famous scientists in the world.
Right. She was given an honorary bachelor's many years later by Cambridge. But she was admitted to graduate school at Cambridge in the UK based on the amazing time she'd already spent with chimpanzees. And I think, and many of us feel, that her kind of lateral approach to her career, and don't forget, this was the early 60s, there weren't a lot of career ladders for a woman scientist to climb. And that may have actually, ironically, worked to her benefit, because there was no temptation for her to pursue an academic career, even if she wanted to, which she did not, because there weren't jobs that were really available at that time for women. So she stayed and stayed and stayed. And instead of doing the conventional climbing the career ladder, she just learned more and more and more as she got deeper and deeper inside the society of these animals.
Well, Craig, I wish we had all day to talk about Jane, but my final question to you is, if you can remember one lasting lesson, important lesson you learned from Jane Goodall, could you share that with us?
Well, of course, the power of observation was her thing. She had an ability to sit closely, watch these animals. Even after years of working with chimps and other primates, when I would sit next to Jane in the forest, she would see things that I didn't see. because she was such a keen observer. And she was an empathetic person also, and that has been seen as being kind of anthropomorphizing, but just her empathy carried over to her empathy, I think, for the planet and for all animals over the course of the rest of her amazing life.
Amazing life indeed. We're going to leave it there, and we so appreciate you talking to us. Craig Stanford, thank you.
Thank you.